is included. Now, Tetris is culturally significant for a lot of reasons. Mr. K alluded to the fact that that one of the reasons it's so significant is because in many ways Tetris is a kind of symbol of the old Soviet bloc, and then kind of things coming down, and then the rise of Western popularity of some forms of Russian culture, or what otherwise were part of the Soviet Union culturally, now kind of being able to permeate into the West in a kind of commercial way. Tetris is a perfect example of that. So there's historical significance there, there's cultural significance there, unquestioned. Aesthetically, not so much. It wasn't a very aesthetically pleasing game. That's okay. It's not created to be aesthetically pleasing. But it is created to be a gameplay masterpiece, and Tetris is nothing if not that. So I'm 100% on board in terms of gameplay. Awesome, awesome, awesome work from that regard. Tetris is far and away up there. It might have to be the #1 spot, but even if it's not, it's got to be on that top 10, top 5 list of the ones that need to be included. So thank you, Troy Loza Tomato. Now, moving on to Maze. Went a little bit outside the box, which I like. Talked about Chrono Trigger. Why, before we get encumbered by the idea that we have to live in this world where only the games from the 70s and 80s should be included first, I think that's a mistake. I don't want to live in that world. Let's take a look at what we should be celebrating first for video games. Here's the criteria I'm going to use for Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is far and away, I think, maybe above every game out there besides Super Mario Brothers and maybe Tetris. Maybe Tetris. Probably not, though. Probably only Super Mario Brothers. Chrono Trigger is lauded by nearly every single person you will ever speak to that knows anything about video games. Think about that for a second. Think about the significance of that. This means that it is almost universally not just loved, but beloved, worshipped by really anyone that knows anything about video games. It is an awesome masterpiece of the artistic nature of video games, the musical nature of video games, the fun that comes from RPGs and a fantasy setting, and it just does all of them so masterfully well that I think it's worthy of nomination. It's so, yes, now let's talk about, in terms of cultural significance, not huge. This is where it shows its weakness. It's not really that culturally significant outside of the video game population. Sure, a lot of people know about Chrono Trigger that probably don't play video games, but it doesn't have anywhere near the same kind of broad appeal as something like Super Mario Brothers. If you went to someone that has never played a video game ever and you said, have you ever seen Super Mario Brothers? Say, absolutely. They could probably even hum you the theme song. You're not going to get the same kind of response from Chrono Trigger. People do not know it as well. Historical significance, I think, is difficult to argue here as well. This is the pinnacle of the JRPG. And in many ways, it is the pinnacle of the kind of 16-bit era of RPGs that I think many of us pine for in a world now where we have the kind of American RPGs that are much more visceral and violent, and Skyrim, first person even. I mean, all these kinds of games that really do run deep. They're fantastic, but I think all of us that grew up in this era really pine for that experience of the 2D RPG, and to that end, I'm not sure there is a better example than Chrono Trigger. In terms of gameplay, what can I say? It's one of the best games I've ever played in terms of gameplay. The ability to run, the ability to kind of build in action into what otherwise would be simply, walking around the overworld map before an encounter gets generated, the ability to have action in between and have battles that are kind of a little more free-flowing, which is something that is now a staple of video games. That's all Chrono Trigger. And do I even really need to mention the music? Yosunori Mitsuda, and it is one of the classic and best video game soundtracks that have ever been created, and it stands up today as well against the likes of Martin O'Donnell and Halo. It stands up Jeremy Soule with Skyrim and Guild Wars. It stands up against all of those tremendously well done video game soundtracks. It really does hold up very well. And I have to say, I think its inclusion here is something I wouldn't question. It happens to be one of the newer ones, maybe the newest one that I have on the list, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't take it away. I'm going to be honest with you, Chrono Trigger makes my top 10. Akira VGA talked about Donkey Kong. I was waiting for somebody to say this because I thought Donkey Kong had to be on here for so many reasons. One, Donkey Kong is, really what takes what really kind of opens Pandora's box of Shigeru Miyamoto, right? The genius of Shigeru Miyamoto is evident right out of the box with Donkey Kong. This is the beginning of what we all know and love now in video games. This is really a jumping off point. As was said, as Akira VGA said, right? It's one of those things. There's no traditional story there. There's not a whole lot of backs. In fact, there's none. There's nothing. There's just this Jumpman guy and this girl who might be his girlfriend, but probably not. Just this hot chick. She gets stole by this giant freaking ape, and he's really pissed about it for some reason. And then so Jumpman goes and tries to rescue her as the ape goes higher and higher. That sounds ridiculous, but it's so... I want you guys to understand how important that is, right? So the idea that Shigeru Miyamoto, without any text, without any backstory, without having any kind of real introduction to characters, and this is where you get into the artistic nature of video games, can give you an experience that is important and meaningful, which is something that I think the Onion Knight was hinting at with his comment about video games as art. There is an artistic nature to how Shigeru Miyamoto can create a scene, a setting, a story, and a vision without ever saying a word, without really having to work at it. I say that the wrong way. Without ever really having to spend a lot of time in terms of developing this entire huge concept, and instead delivers it in the most simplistic of terms, but deeply and meaningful at the same time. That's why Donkey Kong needs to be considered. Culturally, extremely significant. I wouldn't put it as high as, say, Super Mario Brothers, but it's up there, right? It's very significant. It's one of the first games I ever played in an arcade. I'm sure it was many of the first games that many of you played in an arcade as well. So it's culturally significant. It's historically significant. Why? Well, it's the debut of Mario. Yes, he wasn't called Mario at that time, but Jumpman goes on to be developed by Shigeru Miyamoto, and who we now know as Mario, which is the flagship of all of gaming. So if you're going to look at the first use of Mario in a video game, look no further than Donkey Kong. There it is, right? In terms of aesthetically, it was actually a very engaging game. The only thing I think that's a little bit questionable is the sound effect they used for the steps of Jumpman. I thought that was a little bit over the top, but doesn't necessarily break itself from the pattern of the time. I think it's very good for the pattern of the time, what people were doing for cultural norms in video games at the time. It doesn't stick out in any kind of way as being bad. It's a very, very good game. It's fun, it's engaging, the gameplay is good, the patterns are maddening, the effort that it takes to concentrate and realize what patterns are going on around you and to be able to manipulate them and to be able to engage with them is one of the reasons why a King of Kong, right, the film, is so wonderfully and resoundingly acclaimed, because it is just incredible and incredibly well executed. The gameplay is awesome and people still play it to this day. So I'm not going to argue with Donkey Kong. I think it's just a fascinating inclusion. This brings me back to the last one I'm going to include. This is Youngblood, who has come out of hiatus himself to nominate a scientific D6 roll for a game, which I will now do right now. And alright, we've got a 6, which means... Okay, so... so everything I said about Chrono Trigger, I now have to repeat about Final Fantasy VI. Except I'll say this. So, for my money, Final Fantasy VI is a better video game, I said it, than Chrono Trigger. It's better. I think as an experience, top to bottom, it's better. I think in terms of characters, it's better. I think in terms of even music, it's better. I mean, the same man did the music for at least some of the music for both, right? Nobuo Uematsu, right? So you have all these wonderful things working for it. It's the same genre. It's a JRPG. It challenges many of the kind of long-held assertions of what you must do in order to have a JRPG. It does all the same things. But it's a better video game overall. That being said, I'm not sure. I think if you went out there and you asked people what game is more beloved among the video game population, I think you would probably find Chrono Trigger before you'd find Final Fantasy VI. That's neither here nor there. But I think it's worth noting if we're looking at historical and cultural significance, which is 2 of our criteria. So, Youngblood, Final Fantasy VI, I agree. It's actually my favorite video game of all time. Although, you know, I was thinking about this, I actually just found my anthology disc for the original PlayStation. I think it's high time I went back and played it because I haven't replayed that game in probably, it's been close to a decade since I have actually played the game top to bottom. Therefore, I will play it. I played Chrono Trigger top to bottom within the last 5 or 6 years, but I haven't played Final Fantasy VI top to bottom in a while. So maybe my assertions are all dated, and perhaps I'll go back and rediscover it in lots of wonderful ways. But in any case, I think Final Fantasy VI is worthy of inclusion here as well. Although, I would say, if I'm going to make the last of the short lists, Chrono Trigger's on it, Final Fantasy VI is not. Anyway, thank you, Youngblood, for the inclusion of another Scientific D6. Don't have to bring the Scientific D6 in order to participate. You know that, my friend. And with that, I'm going to end the comments from you guys. You know, just awesome stuff. You know, I hope we didn't take too much time on that. I know there was a lot of time involved in terms of talking through that, but I think it's a great conversation. This is the kind of thing that I created the Weekly Ringer to do, and it's what really gets me excited about video games. It's one of the reasons why I want to talk about this stuff with you guys. You guys are smarter than the average bears, right? You're smarter than the average people that are watching this kind of stuff. That just go on to watch mindless internet videos. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing what we're doing, and thank goodness we are, because you guys really did not disappoint this week. So thank you all. Now, my choice. And this is a tough one, you know, because there are so many great suggestions out there, and I think there are maybe a few that I would nominate that weren't necessarily on there. Some of you mentioned Ocarina of Time. I would probably not include that. What I would include is probably Link to the Past, which I think top to bottom is the best Zelda game ever made, at least the ones that I've played, and I haven't played Wind Waker, or the newest Skyward Sword. I haven't played that either. But of the games that I have played, I would say top to bottom it is the best. That being said, I don't think it's the first one that's going to be put into the registry, because I think if I had to put just one game in the registry, I think still I'd go back and I'd probably put something like The Legend of Zelda in there. I just think that one makes more sense in many ways to be included in this for some reason. I don't know why that's my thinking, but you know, historically and culturally, maybe it's a little more important than. In fact, it's not maybe. It is more important than A Link to the Past, even if gameplay and aesthetically it's not. So that's going to be there. That would be another suggestion I have. I probably would include the Colossal Cave Adventure. That's just got to be there. Maze mentioned Zork. I think that's good, but I think Zork is only significant by virtue of Colossal Cave Adventure, which I think should be the kind of Pandora's box for all of adventure gaming. I'll stop beating around the bush. I think this week, folks, I'm going to have to go with Space Invaders. I think Space Invaders should be the first game inducted into the National Video Game Archive. And yes, I'm picking it over Super Mario Brothers and all the ones that we've talked about here. Although Super Mario, if we had to take in a class of 2 or 3. Super Mario Brothers is there along with Space Invaders, and for that I probably